Hi, my name is Daniel Posney, and this is Shifting Perspectives. And this morning on this video, we're going to talk about um, really one of the best relationship tools that I use and that I share with couples when I do relationship coaching with them. But I need to get some backup information about this. There are some concepts that if you haven't heard of, this for me, it was kind of mind blowing that this is so different than what I was kind of implicitly taught and sometimes directly taught, but mostly implicitly, that if someone is being a certain way, if someone is being a jerk or an asshole, then you should probably distance yourself from them. And you've learned something there that you should, stay away from that person. But there's a deeper insight to that, and it goes more into the real science of things, and it really goes into something called quantum physics, and it goes into something called law of attraction, and all that together. The summary of it is that we tend to vibrate at a certain frequency, and our emotions are also frequency. In fact, all of our organs vibrate at different frequencies. So when we are in front of someone, there is a certain attraction to that frequency that we look at. And it's not all bad. It's really in a positive way too, that we look at who we attract within us and we say, wow, that person feels really good to me. Wow, we really connected. And then every once in a while you get someone that doesn't really connect that way. And it feels kind of out of alignment or off or even worse. So there's that part that there's something within us that is attracting this vibration. So if we look in deeper within that there's an attraction in there that's leading back to old childhood trauma. So let's say that you have a trauma back in your childhood. Maybe it's something really small, but it gives you egoic mind, which is your identity of self. Let's say it gives it some kind of a feeling like I'm not really worthy, and I really need to do everything I can to show the world that I'm worthy. And I find this sometimes with women that have had a father that was alcoholic or abusive or some kind of an addict and that needed a lot of caretaking, that they then sometimes attract a man that needs also caretaking. And also they're out in the world in a male dominated industry, showing the world and showing their father either alive or not alive that they should be proud of them and look what I'm doing kind of thing. So inside there's this little piece in there that's kind of tracks all the way back down to childhood, and anything that kind of that's pokes at that leads all the way back down to that some kind of trauma, either direct trauma or perceived trauma, and to the brain it doesn't really matter. So we've all got these things related to not being worthy or not being lovable or whatever, or abandonment. If you're born of the womb, you've got some kind of abandonment there. So all that is kind of sitting inside of us in our body. And if it's not healed and integrated at some point, it kind of solidifies and becomes physicalized as some kind of illness or pain. And it starts to be kind of ingrained in our bodies, ingrained in our processes and the way that we see the world. So if we have that understanding, then we can look at our relationships, especially our intimate relationships, as catalysts to poke at those things so that we can bring them up to the surface and to heal them. But the old way to look at this is, this idiot keeps on poking at these things, and this just keeps on pissing me off. And so we get into a relationship when we start to allow our minds to kind of take control. And it's got a really good judgment and a good story, and it's got a good litigation to say that, we should think this way and we should set these boundaries here and set these parameters and hold this position. And I really want to emphasize that it's really about this holding this position against this person who's actually your beloved. So it's holding this position and creating all these stories that kind of exacerbate the whole thing. And what we do as couples, if we're not enlightened in this concept, is that we keep on hashing out the details, and our mind is like at the ready, trying to hash out all the details, and it's always talking to us. And kind of like, I remember like that Animal House, got a little angel on one shoulder and devil on the other, and that devil, which is the egoic mind, is sitting there, yeah, that's right, that's the way they are. So it's always going to talk to us in our ear. So what sometimes I would say, really honestly, most times relationship coaching and counseling really talks about, I can see that you get a little prickly when you're together, and this is the dynamic that you have together. And when he does this, you do that. Let's, talk about how we can better communicate and how we can learn to give each other space, and all that stuff is really important. But I found that a lot of times it doesn't really solve the underlying problem. It doesn't go to the source of the problem. And the energy of that, it just keeps on revolving and continuing itself. So I was in a retreat recently with a couple, and this is what was brought up is one person said, well, when I have this thing going on and I ask him this, or I say this, he lashes back out at me, and we have this dynamic, and there's this both prickliness, and we both, kind of do battle with each other. And then, then she starts saying that, and then he does it this way. And then he says, well, but I have to say that she also does this. And you can see how, if you're sitting there, it can go on and on. If we let it, it can go on all day long. And it has in relationship, it can go on for years, this back and forth positioning, setting conditions, and then pulling yourselves away from each other and going and finding other best friends and maybe even other lovers. And you kind of stay together because you don't want to hurt each other's feelings. Anyway, you know the story. But what we did in this moment, when there's this started to be this back and forth thing, I just stopped everybody and said, hold on a second. Stop thinking about the details about how this was done this way and that way. Think about the energy. How did it make you feel? What's the energy behind the upset? And that's where we can get to the source of the problem. It's the energy behind it. It's the emotional energy. So here's the tool. When there's some kind of an upset with you and your family members, or you and your beloved, or you and your siblings, whatever it is, if it's causing a trigger in you, it's your opportunity to just like kind of hold the steering wheel of the what's that called? The wheel of your ship, and back off on the thoughts and how it wants to dive into all the details. You kind of got to say, yes, I know about the details, but how is it making me feel? It does take some work to kind of pull back, because the egoic mind has just launched into this trigger. So however long it takes you to do this, hopefully less than 2 hours, to pull back and say, okay, I realize I'm pissed off. I realize I'm triggered. And I realize that he or she didn't do the things I want to do, and they triggered this thing in me. But what is the energy behind it? That's when you can kind of pull back. You can breathe into that. Okay. What is the energy? How is it making me feel? Okay, it's making me feel controlled, or it's making me feel like I'm not worthy, or I'm not smart, or I'm not loved, or something like that. And then you can say, okay, hold on a second, just hold that moment. Can you relate that to some time in your childhood? Can you look back on your childhood and say, there was probably, if I can remember it or not remember it, but I can imagine that there was a moment there that I didn't feel loved. Was it that time when you were in 4th grade and you were put up in front of the class and made fun of, or you peed your pants, or some friend took something away from you or didn't invite you to the birthday party? Whatever the thing is, track that emotion back to your childhood. And most times we have these little traumas in our childhood, or big traumas, and nothing is done about it. We don't get the hug that we need. We don't get the understanding and the tenderness that we need, the validation that we need in that moment. And we carry on, and it's just pushed to the side, and we go have lunch, or we go to the next day. But here's an opportunity to track that back to that moment and heal it from the very source. So here's the process that you can do. So let's say that you get triggered by anyone. It's usually somebody really close to you. And the reason why that is because you're working things out with each other, and they're helping you work things out from your childhood. That's what's going on. So let's say you get triggered and you spout out something and you launch into something. Even then, you can pull back. You have full permission to pull back and say, you know what? I launched out, and I could see that I got really prickly with what you said or what you did. But you can say right here, right now, you can say it's not your responsibility. It's not your fault. It's my trigger, but I am triggered from what you said. So it's something they said, but it's not their fault. Like if they were to say the same thing to somebody else, chances are they wouldn't be as triggered as you are. Now, I'm not talking about verbal abuse and physical abuse. That's another thing. This is just being pissed off by little things that we say to each other, little tones and energies and that kind of thing. So you could say, you know what, man, the energy behind my response to that just totally tells me that I've got a trigger about it. So I'm going to need to pull back and just feel into this. And you may just need to go to another room, or you can do it right there if that person holds really good space with you. Close your eyes and just go into yourself and say, okay, I'm really pissed off right now, but there's something happening right now. What's the emotional energy that's happening right now? Okay, when I was a kid, my dad wasn't home very much and my mother wasn't available. And then this happened and that happened. And I felt this. Oh, that's when it goes right into your heart and you can feel it. Oh my gosh, that little kid, that little boy, that little girl felt that same emotion. And here's this track all the way back to that. So in this moment, you have the opportunity to remove blame from the person that you just blamed. So you can stop blaming your husband and your wife or your cousin or your whatever, and start to realize that this is something that you brought with you over the years. And it's completely normal. It's normal. So many people don't work on this, and they just kind of go to their deathbed with all this stuck energy in them. But you have the opportunity to do this differently. Now, when you're in this process of dealing with this trigger and healing the trigger, when you say that you've got a trigger, it's really important for the other person to hold space with that. And instead of going back into blaming, like let's do this scenario. Let's say that you say that, you know, I'm really triggered right now. It's something that you said that triggered something inside of me, but it's not your responsibility, but you did trigger me. If that person goes back into being upset about that and getting overly sensitive about that statement, that's their thing to work on. But you've addressed your trigger, and the important thing is for you to actually work on it. So you can't just say, oh yeah, man, you really triggered me on that. And it's not you, but this is me, and this is my trigger. And then if you don't do anything about it, that's bullshit. You haven't started to heal it and integrate it, and it's just as good as doing nothing. So it's one thing to look at and acknowledge it, and it's your responsibility, but you've got to start doing some work on it and start to peel away the layers of that. So let's take a perfect scenario. let's say my wife triggers me by saying something that causes some old memory in me. Maybe let's take betrayal. Maybe she does something pretty innocuous. All it takes is some little thing, but it triggers a button of betrayal back, way, way back. Maybe I didn't feel safe or something I didn't trust. And see, it doesn't have to be the same scenario. It doesn't have to be betrayal from a lover. It could be that in the betrayal, there's this feeling unsafe and not trusting. So now you take that as a general emotion and you go back to your child and say, did I feel unsafe or didn't trust my environment? So now you've got the track back. It doesn't have to be the same exact kind of scenario. So now I go back and say, okay, where is this betrayal? Where is it that I didn't feel safe and I didn't trust? And I go back and say, yeah, there's probably maybe the time my dad died, but probably, before that also, something that I may not even remember. But I could imagine my dad working 2 jobs, my mom trying to take care of 3 kids and doing all the stuff that she did. Maybe there was a moment there that I didn't feel completely my mom's presence, that kind of thing. So I can imagine that. Yep, there's an opportunity here. So I work with Valerie and say, this is what I'm feeling, and maybe coming back from this place. And Valerie's, doing just holding my hand or putting her hand on my leg or her hand on my back and rubbing my back and just being really present with this instead of going straight into the fix. Oh, I know what this is. That's that. Okay, it's your shit to work on and you heal it. It's not that. There needs to be moments of clarity with the validation and the tenderness. There needs to be that tenderness there before you launch into the fix. So let's say she's rubbing my back and saying, I'm so sorry that you had this happen to you, and she's just, that's about all she needs to say, and she's just holding me and I'm just processing it. And what my mind is on the verge of doing, it's looking for an opportunity to come out of this presence. So if she says something that, hits another button, my mind will get back into the trigger. So it's really important for that other person to just hold space, not try and talk so much out of it and make a whole dialogue out of it, but you can ask questions of, how does that make you feel? Then what happened next? Just asking questions, but just leaving a lot of space in between the questions and the answers, so that there's a lot of tenderness and space around it. Because when you get too much into the dialogue, there isn't that tenderness and validation. So she's holding my hand, caressing me, rubbing my back, and just talking to me. And I'm going through it in my own mind. Yeah, that's where it came from. And then I open my eyes and I look at her and I realize that she's here for me, that it's not her fault, that I brought this into the relationship. So that goes a long way to starting to heal this. That's a great process to pull back out of worrying about and talking about and getting triggered about all the details. And that's all you do. You can push aside the need to go into the details and then go into the energy, not the details, the energy, the emotional energy. Okay. So remember that. When you start getting lost in, and your mind is telling you to think about this and how she did that, and she deserves this, and you need to be resentful about that. That's all the mind. That's not really you. That's this program that's running that you need to put the pause button on and just halt it, because it's trying to take over you right now. This is not you talking. So pull back, get into your heart, take a deep breath, get some space around you, and go into that little process. Don't worry. And I know it seems like it's a struggle at first, because your mind wants to say, why should I do this? Why should I get into this process? I just want to continue to be angry, which totally happens. Is that you get into the trigger, you've got a process to fix it, from the very beginning, and heal this for all your life. And still the mind will convince you, screw that. But the thing is that it gets easier and easier, and your life gets softer, and there's less drama in your life, because you're healing the dynamics of that energy, not just with this person in front of you, but with any person that hits the trigger of that emotion. So that's where the whole benefit comes in. So let's see. The person holding space. Yeah. So it's a kind of a tough process for someone that's just starting this, because you're not taught this. This is new. But the more that you practice it, it gets easier and easier and easier. And then eventually, those things that you got triggered on before, they just kind of trickle up to the surface. Like my thing was feeling insignificant, underappreciated, and unacknowledged. And I wanted to look at that, and I wanted to kind of look at it from both angles, like the practical way and the spiritual way. So the spiritual way says, it's my egoic mind that needs to be validated and affirmed and all that stuff. On the practical way, it does feel good to be validated and affirmed and acknowledged and that kind of thing. So I want to make sure that I'm being honest and tender with my own self, that it does feel good to me, but also it's the trigger that I want to look at, that if I don't get those things. So I'm working at it from both angles. So what happens now, since I've been doing this process for a long time, I still get triggered, and it's not that we don't want to ever get triggered again. It's just that when that trigger comes up, we now have a process. And after that process is really kind of it's really running smooth, and you get these little things, the tiny little things. You don't launch out into anger and yelling anymore. I can't remember when I did that. But still what happens is a little trickle of that old energy pops up every once in a while. But it's like it pops up just to kind of give me a little practice, just to kind of pat its head down. It doesn't run in front of me and take over and speak for me anymore. It's still there and I can feel the energy of it, but it's more like, no, you're not going to get me this time. I'm in charge now. And it's just that kind of feeling. So I know this concept of, me and it kind of thing is different for a lot of people, but it's just something to start to practice. Is when they say be the witness of, or be the observer of, or notice your thoughts and those kind of things. That's what they're talking about, is that you've combined yourself with your egoic self, with your identity of self and your story and all that. And all this is just practicing to kind of release that grip and notice yourself a little bit more, and stop defending your own mind and your own thoughts and your own identity. So that's it. That's what I got. Have a wonderful day. I love you. Bless you.